Hello and welcome to Cisco Router Training 101. My name's Don Crawley. I'm from soundtraining.net. We're the Seattle, Washington-based provider of accelerated training and publisher of learning resources for IT professionals. This time we're doing password recovery on a Cisco router. It's based on Chapter 13 in my book, The Accidental Administrator, Cisco Router Step-by-Step Configuration Guide. The iOS version that we're using for this demo is 15.1, but this procedure is fundamentally unchanged in many, many years. So no matter whether you're using a much older version or a current version, the procedures that I'm going to show you should work. Prerequisites for this lesson: all you need is physical access to a Cisco router. You cannot do this across a network. You have to have physical access through a serial console connection. And the equipment software requirements: one Cisco router. The one I'm using is a Cisco Model 1941, but the procedures that I'm going to show you, as I mentioned previously, should work on pretty much any Cisco router. You'll also need a computer for your management workstation. The one I'm using is running Microsoft Windows 8, but certainly you could use Linux, earlier versions of Windows, Mac, Unix, as long as you can open up a terminal window. You'll need a console cable, perhaps a USB to serial adapter if your management workstation doesn't have a COM port on the back, and you'll need some form of terminal emulation software. The one I'm using is PuTTY, which is available for free download at www.putty.org. Here's our network diagram, and boy, it's about as simple as it gets. You'll simply have a management workstation connected via a serial console cable to a Cisco router. The console port, that is, on a Cisco router. And if you don't have a COM port on your management workstation, then you'll need a USB to serial adapter in order to do this exercise. The steps are pretty straightforward. They're very similar to other Cisco devices. Let's just go through them. There's about 10 steps. The first one is you power cycle the router. Then you interrupt the boot process with a control break, or depending on the software that you're using, maybe you use a control B or some other key sequence, but the one I'm using for PuTTY is a control break. That takes you into what's called ROM monitor mode, and in ROM monitor mode you'll change the configuration register. The configuration register is a software value that tells the router how to boot, among other things, and we're going to change it to 0x2142. The 0x means hexadecimal, so it's hex 2142, and that configuration register value tells the router to ignore its saved configuration on boot. We'll then reboot the router, and it will ignore its saved configuration. Then you can enter privilege mode without a password, since there is no saved configuration. Once you're in privilege mode, you'll copy the saved configuration from NVRAM to DRAM. You'll reset the passwords to a known value, change the configuration register back to hex 2102, which is the default, save the new configuration, and reload the router. So it's really pretty straightforward, as I mentioned. Here's your disclaimer. This video is provided solely as a courtesy to you, our viewer. No guarantees whatsoever. Please don't attempt these procedures on a production router without first testing them for security and suitability in a lab environment. These procedures may destroy your router's existing configuration. Certainly they will destroy your existing passwords, and performing these procedures may open up your router to the public internet and subject your network to attack. So make sure you have current backups and take precautions, including data encryption and additional access controls to protect sensitive data. So here we go. You're seeing a PuTTY terminal window with a router asking for a username, and let's just assume for the sake of the demonstration that you don't know the username or the password, and so how do you get into it? And we're going to power cycle the router, and then when it comes back up, we'll interrupt the boot process, and I'll show you how to do password recovery. So here we go with the power cycling. And this router takes a little bit, so we'll do an edit here so you don't have to watch the whole process. But when we come back, we'll interrupt the boot process and start the process of doing password recovery. We're going to enter the key command control break to interrupt the boot process, and it'll return a ROM-mon prompt. As you can see here, that means ROM monitor mode, which is a mode of the router's operation that's used for repairs and diagnostics. The one that you see is simply a line number, and we're going to issue the command confreg. And actually, normally you would enter it with the value that you want to change, but I want to show you something here. So if you just enter confreg, it will show you the current configuration register value, and you can see there it's hex 2102. And it asks you if you want to change the configuration. You actually could go through these prompts and modify it, but I just think it's easier just to go ahead and enter the actual configuration register value you want. So I'm going to say no to this, and we'll do confreg hex 0x2142, and it whirs for just a moment, and we'll do a reset And when it comes back, the router is going to ignore its saved configuration in NVRAM. That's what the hex 2142 configuration register tells it to do. It just says ignore whatever's in NVRAM, and it'll come back and it won't have a configuration, and then I'll show you how to do password recovery. So again, this takes a moment. We'll do an edit here so you don't have to watch the whole thing. Well, now we're rebooted, and you can see down at the bottom the system is prompting us to enter the initial configuration dialog. The reason it's doing that is because it ignored the saved configuration on boot since we changed the configuration register to hex 2142, and so it doesn't have a configuration. And it's saying, gosh, well, since I don't have a configuration, maybe I need to start the initial configuration dialog. And we're going to say no to that this time around, and it'll whir for a moment. You'll see a bunch of console messages fly by. You'll hear a ding in just a minute, and then it'll return a generic router prompt. We'll hit enter to see the prompt. There you can see it's just a generic router prompt. And now we can go directly into privilege mode without a password, since there is no configuration with any passwords in it. So we'll type EN, short for enable, and notice that we're now in privilege mode. We can tell that because of the pound sign in the prompt. And we're going to copy the saved configuration from NVRAM into DRAM. The configuration is there, it was just ignored on boot. So we'll use the command copy, start, run, which is short for copy, startup config, running config, and confirm that that's where we want to send it. And notice that the prompt now changes to router 02 because it now has its configuration. We can now go into global configuration mode and reset passwords. So let's do it. Let's go into configuration terminal, abbreviating that conf space T. We're going to first change the privilege mode password with the command enable secret p@ss5678. The p@ss5678 is just some arbitrary password. Obviously, you'll want to create your own. And now that's changed. Now let's also, as you'll recall, there was a username, so we also need to change the username password as well. Let's just see how many other usernames there might be on this system. This is just a good idea as you're going through it. So we'll type the command do show run, then use the pipe to pipe the output into an include filter, and we'll see lines of the configuration that include the phrase username or the word username. And there's only one, so that's the only one we need to worry about. Let's change it as well. Username Don, password. Boy, my typing is just terrible today. p@ss1234. Now we'll save it back to NVRAM with the command do copy run start. If we were just in privilege mode, we wouldn't have to use the modifier do, but since we're in global configuration mode, a sub mode, we have to precede the command with the modifier do. And now the configuration is saved. Let's also modify the configuration register back to the default of hex 2102. So we'll use the command config register. I used the tab completion, by the way, to display the entire command. Just type part of the command, then touch tab, and it'll finish it for you. So then 0x2102. And now it's reset. We can confirm that by using the command show version, do show version. Again, we have to use the do since we're in configuration mode. And at the very bottom of the output in a moment, you'll see that the configuration register now is 2142, but will be 2102 at next reload. So we're good. Let's go ahead and reload it. The command do reload and confirm. And when it comes back, we'll be dealing with known passwords. We can get into the system and operate normally. So all we've done here is we've copied the configuration into DRAM. We've modified the privilege mode password and the user Don's password, and we'll be able to go back in and log in normally when it finishes rebooting. So again, we'll do an edit here so you don't have to watch the entire reboot process, and when it comes back, we'll show you how it works. So it's finished rebooting. Let's hit enter and see what happens. So now it's asking us for a username. Let's enter the username Don and the password that we configured, p@ss1234. And look at that, we're in. Now let's try going into privilege mode. So EN, short for enable, and the password p@ss5678. And again, we're in. So pretty straightforward, not terribly difficult. It does require physical access in order to do password recovery on the router, but you certainly want it that way. You wouldn't want somebody to be able to do it across the network, and so that's another security benefit, if you will. There are some variations on this. They're covered in my book in Chapter 13, some other ways that you can do password recovery or some other nuances to it. If you'd like more information, we've got it at our website at www.soundtraining.net. I blog at soundtraining.net/blog. You can subscribe to our newsletter at soundtraining.net/newsletter. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Google+. And if you'd like more videos, they're available at our video channel at www.soundtraining.net/videos. And you can pick up a copy of the companion book, the Cisco Router Step-by-Step Configuration Guide, part of the Accidental Administrator series. It's available at our bookstore at www.soundtraining.net/bookstore. Well, I hope this has been helpful. For soundtraining.net, I'm Don Crawley. We'll see you next time.